the book review for April, not March, is Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. Only the second book I read by him, but even better than the first, which was Never Let Me Go. So good, so amazing. Should definitely read. And then I'll explain what it is, and then I'll explain why. So, the novel is set in a dystopian future where children are genetically engineered to have advanced, enhanced academic capabilities. Our protagonist, Klara, as is in the title, is an artificial friend, or an AF, as they refer to it, and she is chosen by a sick girl named Josie as to be her companion. Klara is, we see quite early, a more than average intelligence AF, and we begin the story in the store, this large store where the AFs sit waiting for someone to come choose them, and there's almost like a orphaned child process of like all the AFs looking out for their future family with eagerness and almost desperation, which is quite interesting. So, she gets chosen by Josie. Klara learns that Josie's sister died after being lifted, and Josie is gravely ill. She's living at the house with Josie and the mother. So, a nice suburban house, just her, Josie, and the mother, and occasionally the housekeeper. But there's another friend, Josie's childhood friend, Rip, who she learns is not lifted and faces discrimination from others because of this. Klara is asked by Josie's mother to imitate her daughter, that's Josie, in case Josie dies from this sickness. Klara is understandably very attached to Josie by this point. She's determined to save her, and she destroys a pollution-spewing machine, which she calls the Cootings machine. She sacrifices some of her own, like, robotic life force, if you want to call it that, her own body, to do this, but Josie's condition worsens. Klara pleads with the sun, that's right, the sun, because the AFs use the sun as energy, so she sees it as a deity, sort of, pleads with the sun, and Josie recovers. After Josie recovers, she grows apart from Rick, leaves for college, and we end the story with Klara, now stationary as a scrapyard for AFs, content with her memories of Josie and the sun's kindness. That's a massive overview for the spoilers. I should put a like text thing at the bottom before that there are spoilers. But yeah. So, that's the basics. Now, why is it unique? It is unique, most of all, because of the style. Style-wise, the story is very interesting. Most of all, perspective. As I've said, it's called Klara and the Sun. Our protagonist is Klara. We follow the world through the eyes of Klara. An AF. We're not seeing this dystopian future through the eyes of a human. We're seeing it through the eyes of a robot, observing the humans, which is, so interesting, right? I say robot, but you don't ever get the sense she's a robot. It's artificial friend is really the word. Robot's never used, never really described or implied. And that's perspective makes it so interesting, right? Because you're seeing this world from the perspective of someone who we might otherwise have no empathy for. I mean, she's a robot in our own view, right? Once again, narrative-wise, it's really useful because she's an outsider. We as the audience are an outsider, we're getting a view in. Putting us in her shoes also adds to the disorientation that we might experience seeing this new world. Rather than seeing it from the point of view of Josie or another human, where we might assume it's more dystopian than it is, or he wants us to think it is, we see it from the sort of like childlike, innocent perspective of Klara. The very fact of that disarms some of the negative assumptions, some of the stereotypes, some of the ideas you might have had going into it. And it gives Ishiguro, as a writer, more time to develop affection for Klara and the other AFs, because we see them from the start as, they're kind of like children, as opposed to these menacing AFs taking over the world, right? That means we get the full experience and the time to judge them properly by the end of the book. The whole book, when you see it in that light, can appear to be designed to do just that, to humanise these AFs, as well as, humanize them not just for us actually, but humanise them for the characters they meet, right? Because the characters they meet will have spent time with them just like we have, and get to know them as people rather than as AFs. Klara's perspective, once again the most interesting part, also adds good narrative aspects to the story, such as one moment on page 217 when she spots a monster, right? It reads, "We drove past a large creature with numerous limbs and eyes, and then even as I watched, a crack appeared down its centre. As it divided itself, I realised it had been all along two separate people, a runner and a dog-walk woman." So, she sees a monster. She's describing it to us as a monster. Realise, oh, it's just a woman walking a dog and someone running, going side by side. And because she's an AF, she hasn't seen the real world. She couldn't distinguish, just thought it was a monster. And she described it to us as a monster. So for our whole sentence, we were assuming she was seeing a monster. And it's that perspective. You're in her perspective. You're experiencing the world, and you don't know what is what. Because it's kind of like I'm being pretentious here and say the allegory of the cave. Like, you are seeing things only through the reflection and the shadows. It's her light, and it's her shadows, right? So when she sees a monster, we don't know if that's a monster or if that's someone walking their dog. The perspective changes the whole way we see this world compared to how we might see it with a human. In particular, at the beginning, as I said, it begins in the store. That location established them as children of sorts, or pets. They're happy in a place separate off from the world, run by the motherly maternal figure of the store manager. They all await patiently for a family, especially for a child, to pick them out. Sometimes they look with envy when the newer models arrive. So there's these B3 models, which are the new ones, and when they arrive, they kind of feel like, like an older dog seeing a new one in the lot. Like they're like, oh, they can do this, I can't. There's a human aspect to it, which once again humanizes them from the start. We see them as people struggling to be picked, and reduce to them as that explicitly and from the start, rather than as robots to be picked off the shelf. And a fascinating theme running through this whole thing is the way that these AFs are treated. Indeed, that's kind of a central question of the book, which is posed through their interactions with humans. Both how would they be treated and how should they be treated. In this world, they serve as kind of a crutch, emotionally, for humans, both children and adult alike. Their use as such as this emotional crutch gives them a huge amount more humanization than other robotic humanoids, other things like this in popular fiction. And in the case of Klara, this is exemplified. Her possible task in replacing Josie gives her not only the access to time and attention from humans and from the family, but also focus and care that borders on love. So on page 104, the mother actually instructs Klara, this is the first time, to act as Josie. And this is before the whole reason that she's being brought up is mentioned to us. So we're curious, why does she want her to act like Josie? We thought she's just a friend. And she's using her as sort of emotional sounding board. And when Klara talks like Klara, she says, "No, that's Klara, I want Josie." You begin to see, even though Klara is humanized, what the other humans are seeking is a replacement, essentially, for her own child that she fears she may lose. It's the first real glimpse we get that Klara is not meant to be just for Josie, but for the adults in her life too, specifically for the mother. It points us in a direction that kind of feels, a little bit more sinister than the innocent story has felt so far. And it makes us question the morality of using these AFs, especially now that we are friendly with this protagonist in Klara. It makes us, question, is this something humans should be doing? As I've said, the humanization of Klara feeds into this, and it's central to the perspective, the story, the style, everything. And it helps us question the premise, most of all because of how human her emotions are. Page 113 comes just after that visit to the falls in 104, with Klara saying, "The mother, just like Josie, became more distant, and if she encouraged me in the hall, or encountered me in the hall, or on the landing, she no longer would greet me the way she had done before." So, after the falls, after she feels like she hasn't impressed the mother, she feels like there's a distance growing, and she's sad about it. I mean, so much of the story is just Klara having normal emotions, like a child growing up in this house. Even though we find out more and more, she's not a normal child growing up in that house. Endearingly and tragically, like lots of children, sadly. Rather than reacting with anger to her mistakes to others, she blames herself and compares herself to those newer B3 models and worries that her limitations have caused both Josie and the mother to regret the choice they'd made. She's like a kid. She's scared that somebody else is doing better, that she's not impressing the people in her life. She's not a robot. That's the most important part to humanity. She says, my best course was to work harder than ever to be a good AF to Josie until the shadows receded. She doesn't see the solution as accepting she can't do everything. She needs to work harder to win the love and affection of those around her. Once again, very human thing. Not only are humans lonely, their own loneliness has an impact on the protagonist, who might not consider to be capable of their own loneliness. Right? So their loneliness is impacting an AF meant to solve the problem of loneliness, which is, it's crazy, right, when you think about it like that. But on the note of AFs and their treatment, there's an interesting kind of class comment made in the story, particularly through the character of the housekeeper. So she's one of the few characters that enter the house as well and is consistently there. So as I've said, there's a massively narrow framing of the book in terms of characters, because there's also a massively narrow physical framing. We spend so much of the book within their house, which is an incredibly small world. The mother and Josie live quite a distant life in this, not even suburban, basically rural household, with more and more isolation. The mother goes to work, and Josie remains home for occasional visits from friends, but not that much. The only real presence continually is that of the housekeeper, at least of a human. She's at first suspicious and confrontational towards Klara, kind of understandable, because she sees her as a threat. Her presence as hired help kind of puts into focus how privileged this family is. They can have hired help, they can have an AF, they can live this world, this life separate from the world, as the father points out. Her presence also plays into the issue of how the AFs are treated. To protect Josie, she ends up allying with Klara in her mad plan to get the son to help Josie. So, the housekeeper is treated as hired help by them. She's clearly distanced from the family, but she still wants the best for Josie. And in the same way that Klara is an AF just there to serve them, they both ally in wanting the best for Josie and work towards that end within the household. The fact that she may replace the daughter, that's Josie, is successfully made a dividing line, and the father in particular finds this difficult. So Klara refers to the mother as the mother, the father as the father, very formal roles, whereas Josie she's much more close with, and the father has a different perspective. Laid off by automation, he's clearly more hesitant about this whole idea. There's brief references to him living among this community, like a gated community kind of, but that makes it sound fancy. Imagine a dystopian, isolated community within a city, and that's a community of like-minded people who've been put out of work by automation, who approach life with kind of a throwback retro view of not including these AFs in their life. And that kind of approaches the classic genre bit of this fiction, and this robot fiction, of people put out of work, struggling with their lives because of these things, because of these robots that are also humanized to us. So the father represents the opposing force, kind of, which is, again, the complexity that Ishiguro brings, because the community that he lives in is described as happy and separate, which is the classic apocalypse bit. But the father is still involved in life, and he still comes around to the idea of using Klara. He's not some fanatic. lots of nuance in how they treat the AFs. All of that raises a lot of tough questions within the book. Do we as humans have the capability for empathy for a humanoid being? Like, because something looks so human to us, is it entirely natural we should have the same empathy we have for a human, even if we know it's not one? Or is that a natural reaction that we can avoid? Is it a necessity for us to feel that empathy? Is that empathy part of being human? If you don't feel empathy towards an AF, is that bad? Even though you know it's just an AF. Interesting questions, right? Or is there a difference between your mother who'd kill a spider and your father who feels bad to release it? To what extent is our empathy limited to humans, given we know, even with humans, empathy has varying degrees of emotion and significance? We feel much more empathy for the people close to us than far away. We feel much more empathy for a lot of people, for people within our own country than others. Empathy is already relative, and this brings me to the question, how relative is it, right? To what degree are we beholden to this empathy? And that's the kind of fundamental issue of the book, which I think is most interesting. More interesting than any comments about automation that it makes, really, honestly. The point is brought home because of how fragile the life we humans have is depicted, and that's constantly reinforced, primarily through Josie. She's sick all the time, that's the main driving plot, her sickness, and it provides the logical backbone for the story, and eventually also a narrative timeline for when she recovers. So she's sick, she needs an AF lives there, she recovers. It provides a natural structure for the story. Interestingly though, this fragility is again used to humanize the AFs by reminding us of their fragility too. The most significant root to this conceit is how they get power. As I've said, the sun is essentially what powers them, Klara and the sun. And that makes them see the sun as the sort of deity. So they're solar powered. And they kind of deify the sun. And throughout the story, Klara is doing this. She is asking the sun for help as if it's a living being that can help her. And she seeks it not just for herself, but for Josie. She seeks the sun for humans, for Josie's health. Again, nature is depicted to us as the most powerful force, even for AFs, one that they rely upon as well. And then, in a more tragic fashion, the message is reinforced to us in the last chapters, in the scrapyard, when the out-of-service AFs include the newer B3 models that Klara was once kind of jealous of. For Klara, it's a message that even the newest models end up in this same scrapyard that they all end up in. We're all finite, our mortal bodies will go away, and even for the AFs, that is true. There is an end, and we all end up in the same place. At least physically. We won't get out to the rest. The manager, so that maternal figure from the start, that we haven't seen from the start, appears in the scrapyard to provide a knowing sadness. She views the AFs as these sort of children to her, and her sadness at their demise seems to be fraught with an understanding this was always going to happen, an understanding she couldn't share with Josie, and she couldn't share with Klara. More specifically, she couldn't share with Klara. In the same way Josie's parents didn't tell her what's going on, the store manager couldn't tell Klara what was likely going to happen. It's this game of the adults trying to explain to both Klara and Josie what real life is going to be. Despite all of Klara's spots, ultimately the manager knew this would happen, and she's sad but also happy that Klara succeeded. She calls Klara special and is glad that she found a good family, even if she's a little surprised by that. And her speech, where she compliments her on that, suggests that other AFs weren't so lucky. So in summary, the robots can't escape their fate either. That is the whole point, that's the end. Humans cannot escape their fate. The AFs can't either. Humanizes them once again, reminds us of their fragility, reminds us of our fragility. We cannot escape our fate, they cannot escape their fate. It's a unifying emotion and destiny between us two, AFs, humans, in this world. All of that raises a few interesting and fundamental questions for the future, which is, do you treat robots with empathy if they're human? Do you treat them with more empathy if they're humanoid? Do you treat them with empathy because you should? Do you treat them with empathy because you have to? And more than that, is it right for us to allow robots to reach such a humanoid state where they could ever replace a child in our lives. While the story is ultimately a really personal one about emotions of love, loss, and grief, the larger questions it raises are all societal. Given the way technology is progressing right now, you can see it coming. So the question the book poses is, what are you going to do about it? Because of the ability to do both, the existential and the personal, through such an unusual and novel premise, like the concept is so different, the book has to be, I'm going to give it a 7.9. I couldn't go 8 for some reason, but 7.9. I have to rate it really highly. There are elements where you maybe felt like you were occasionally missing a little bit of depth on the surrounding cast of characters, but the main ones were amazing. The premise was amazing, and the core of it was absolutely there. It's a good story, it's a good premise, the issues raised are interesting. I would absolutely give it a high mark, and I would absolutely recommend Klara and the Sun.